At 6, the Prime Minister expresses concern in the wake of the damning report into the BBC's Panorama interview with Princess Diana. Business as usual today, but Boris Johnson speaks of his sympathy after Prince William voiced anger at the way his mother was deceived.
I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family, and I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
It comes as Prince Harry talks about the impact his mother's death had on his behaviour in later life.
Okay, I wasn't drinking Monday to Friday, but I would probably drink a week's worth in one day on a Friday or a Saturday night.
Also on the programme tonight, a ceasefire comes into force between Israel and Hamas, counting the cost in Gaza as thousands of Palestinians return home after 11 days of fighting. Spain says British tourists can return from Monday, but you'll still have to quarantine on your return home. And it's back, getting ready for Eurovision's return tomorrow night after it was cancelled last year because of the pandemic.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, we'll have reaction to the departure of Wolves manager Nuno Espirito Santo, who's leaving the club at the end of the season.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has expressed his concern in the wake of Lord Dyson's highly critical report into the BBC's Panorama interview with Princess Diana in 1995. An inquiry found that the BBC covered up deceitful behaviour used by the journalist Martin Bashir to secure his world-exclusive interview. Last night, Prince William launched a scathing attack on the BBC, saying it had let his mother, his family and the public down. Today, Boris Johnson said he hoped the BBC would take steps to ensure that nothing like that ever happened again. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
Failed by a rogue reporter and the leaders of a national institution, the BBC. Prince William was getting on with royal duties today, while his excoriation of the BBC rang through the corporation's corridors. The fact is that pretty much from the moment the Panorama interview with his mother was screened in November 1995, William, who was then aged 13, has suspected that his mother was deceived into doing it by the Panorama reporter Martin Bashir. The choice and intensity of William's words last night was devastating.
It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia and isolation that I remember from those final years with her.
The BBC is facing tough questions. This was the Prime Minister on a visit to the HMS Queen Elizabeth.
Well, I am obviously concerned by the findings of Lord Dyson's report. I'm very grateful to him for what he's done. I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family, and I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
Eton College, the 6th of September 1995. 12 days before Diana had her first meeting with Martin Bashir, at which he produced bogus documents and made far-fetched claims. Before that meeting, the family unit was still functioning. According to William last night, the Panorama interview caused a sharp deterioration in his parents' relationship. This is how the troubled decade of the 1990s unfolded for Charles and Diana. In June 1992, the book Diana, Her True Story had been published. It later emerged Diana had cooperated closely with the author. In December 1992, it was announced that the couple were to separate. In June 1994, Prince Charles gave an interview to ITV in which he admitted to adultery. By mid-1995, Diana was actively considering doing an interview for the BBC's Panorama programme. It was in November 1995 that Martin Bashir, after weeks of secret contact with Diana, conducted the interview. A few weeks later, in December 1995, the Queen gave permission for the couple to seek a divorce. In August 1997, Diana died in a car crash in Paris. In his written statement last night, Prince Harry said the media's culture of what he called exploitation and unethical practices had ultimately killed his mother. He continues to be very open about his struggle with mental health issues, a struggle triggered by the events of the 90s. In a new series of documentaries for American television, he describes the effect it had on him.
I was willing to drink, I was willing to take drugs, I was willing to try and do the things that made me feel less like I was feeling. But I slowly became aware that, okay, I wasn't drinking Monday to Friday, but I would probably drink a week's worth in one day on a Friday or a Saturday night.
At the time, it was hailed as the scoop of the decade. More than 25 years later, we finally know the truth about an unscrupulous reporter and at times vulnerable woman, and the hurt that is still very real. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The Metropolitan Police have said they will look again at the contents of Lord Dyson's report to ensure there is no significant new evidence after previously deciding not to begin a criminal investigation. For its part, the BBC said it had made fundamental changes in governance since the 1990s. Here's our home editor, Mark Easton.
This is a crisis that goes to the heart of the BBC's DNA, the values of integrity and fairness that underpin its reputation around the world. The deceit may go back a quarter of a century, but there are unanswered questions that carry huge jeopardy for the corporation today. Does the scandal show the BBC covering up its failings and mistreating innocent whistleblowers? The graphic designer who was commissioned by Martin Bashir to create mocked-up bank statements has long claimed he was made the scapegoat for the scandal.
I would like to speak to Tim Davey, the now Director General, in person, exactly about that. Why to this day it looks like the important people are being covered up.
Panorama staff also tried to blow the whistle on Martin Bashir's unethical behaviour, fearing it threatened the reputation of BBC journalism. One producer says raising the matter cost him his job.
I brought the documents to the attention of the BBC management, as I was asked to do by a BBC lawyer, and was told within 24 hours of doing that effectively I would no longer be part of the programme. I had been disloyal. That's what happened to whistleblowers at that time at the BBC.
There's also the question of why the BBC rehired Martin Bashir in 2016 as religious affairs correspondent. James Harding was the director of BBC News at the time and says he takes full responsibility for the mistaken decision to re-employ him.
Did you know that he'd forged bank statements?
To answer your question, I didn't know. And in fact, if I had known, of course he wouldn't have got the job. And I can't help feeling that the fact that he was hired back in 2016 has made things more difficult for everyone, so I'm sorry that he was.
The BBC says it rehired Martin Bashir after a competitive interview process. We now, of course, have the Dyson report. We didn't have it then, a statement says. What we do know is that in 2017, the then Director General, Tony Hall, promoted Martin Bashir to religion editor, even though he knew all about the fake documents.
I want to ensure that when we do make mistakes, they are caused by trying to serve our viewers, not by looking after ourselves.
That was Lord Hall on becoming DG in 2013, preempting the most troubling question of all about this scandal. Does the BBC need oversight to ensure corporate reputation doesn't come ahead of journalistic values?
Hello, I'm from the BBC. Can we ask some questions about the Dyson report, please?
One former BBC executive connected to the scandal did not come to her door today. Another has quit his post on the board of the broadcast regulator Ofcom. The government says the Bashir scandal is so serious it may require a look at how the BBC administers itself.
Government does have a responsibility to look very carefully to see whether the governance of the BBC does need reform in the light of these devastating findings.
The BBC values say this: trust is the foundation of the BBC. We are independent, impartial and honest. Without that trust, the corporation knows it's doomed. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Thousands of Palestinians who fled their homes in Gaza during the conflict over the past 11 days have begun returning after a ceasefire came into force in the early hours of this morning. At least 243 people were killed there in the fighting, among them more than 100 women and children. 12 people were killed in Israel by rockets fired by Palestinian militants. Well, Israel's bombardment from the land, sea and air has also caused huge damage in Gaza. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has finally been allowed into the occupied territory by the Israelis and joins us now. Jeremy.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, near where I am, I'm on a roof. There's a lot of the damaged buildings are here, but also the streets are full of people. You might be able to hear some horns blaring, walking around, celebrating, relaxing after all that they've been through. And my colleagues here, who've been here, of course, throughout, Palestinians who live in Gaza, say that this time yesterday was still very scary until, of course, the ceasefire started.
At 2 in the morning, the ceasefire started, and in Gaza it was safe to go out again, to celebrate survival and to swear allegiance to Jerusalem, the holy city around 60 miles away, which most Palestinians here have never been able to visit. We sacrificed everything we have for Jerusalem, he's saying. I'm ready to sacrifice my son and my wife and myself for Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, Palestinians were up all night too. Israel says the city is the eternal capital of the Jewish people and it will not be divided again. 2 million Palestinians live in Gaza, a thin strip of land along the Mediterranean, slightly smaller in square miles than the Isle of Wight. At first light, it was time to ask whether the suffering had been worth it. Men from the armed wing of Hamas, the Izz-al-Din al-Qassam brigades, had no doubts. They paraded in Khan Yunis, one of Gaza's towns, to bury 9 men from their unit. They were killed in a strike on a tunnel on the 4th day of bombing. Hamas thought the tunnels were safe. Locating and hitting them from the air was a significant achievement for Israel. Thousands came to honor the dead men. Here in Gaza, as well as in Israel, there is no sense that the ceasefire is an end to their fight. The bodies could only be recovered after the ceasefire. They're digging for others. Hamas are telling Palestinians that they fought not just for Gaza, but for Palestinian rights in Jerusalem.
This is a huge demonstration of support for the armed wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades. And they're sending a message as well that despite the hammering they've taken from the Israelis, that they're still here, they're still ready to fight, and they're talking as well about Jerusalem. That's been the theme of many of the chants here in the cemetery.
And in Jerusalem, Palestinian worshippers fought Israeli police in the courtyard of the Aqsa Mosque, the most holy for Muslims after Mecca and Medina. Nowhere in the world is more contested, more charged with national as well as religious significance as this place. The mosque was built on the site of the Jewish temple. Jerusalem was where the crisis that led to 11 days of war boiled over, and where it might happen again. In Gaza, Hamas have claimed victory, as Israel did too. The only certainty is that without political change and diplomatic progress, they'll fight again. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Gaza.
Spain says it will officially lift restrictions for UK travellers from Monday, and you won't be required to take a PCR COVID test if you go. But Spain remains on the government's amber list, meaning you will have to quarantine for up to 10 days when you come back. Our correspondent Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid for us now. So Guy, where does this leave things?
Well, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez today talked about how important the British tourism market is for Spain. He underlined the fact that the British market is the single biggest foreign market for Spain. So it has a huge significance for the economy overall. However, there is that issue of Spain being on the amber list. Spain has made no secret of the fact that it would desperately like to be upgraded to the green list when the revision takes place in the coming weeks. But something that the Spanish authorities have also talked about in recent weeks is that they would like London to look at Spain not as just one blanket case in terms of infections and vaccinations and so on. They would like the UK government to look more closely at individual regions, because they point out that, for example, the Canary Islands or the Balearic Islands or the region of Valencia on the Mediterranean coast, all of which are popular tourism destinations, that they all have much lower infection rates than other parts of the country, such as Madrid, where I am. So they would like possibly some kind of preferential treatment for those popular tourism destinations when the revision of the traffic light system comes around in a few weeks.
Guy Hedgecoe in Madrid, thank you. Australian wine, machines, metals, those are some of the goods that Australia sends to Britain every year. Cars, medicines, alcoholic drinks are among the things we send back. Since Brexit, the UK has been working on a new trade deal with Australia, and it looks like it could now be close. Today, the International Trade Secretary Liz Truss is understood to have offered Australia more concessions in an effort to seal the deal by June. Our global trade correspondent Darshini David reports.
British lamb may be on the menu this spring, but what of the future? When it comes to trade deals, both sides want the best cut for their country folk, be it choice, price or opportunities. But that means compromise. Farmers fear that it's agriculture that'll pay the price, with the removal of tariffs, import taxes and quotas on Australian products.
We have countries around the world that can produce beef and lamb cheaper than we can. Will it be as good a product? Possibly, possibly not. Will it be as healthy a product? Possibly, possibly not. But we don't know that. But it's going to mean that my bottom line vanishes.
Some British farmers fear that they'll struggle to compete with their Australian counterparts on cost. Farms here tend to be much smaller, some standards and rules are quite different. But economists say that given Australia is so far away, that relaxing tariffs might only increase the amount of goods coming in by the equivalent of 0.1% of our total imports. The real concern, they say, is that this could pave the way for greater access for farmers from even bigger producers, America or Brazil, in future trade talks. And that's why Australian farmers are keen to get more access now.
At the end of the day, it's not about displacing UK product. It's about making sure that we're one of the first countries that you look to when you don't have the supply locally.
Back in Downing Street, ministers gathered to argue the issues yesterday. With an urge to get the deal done fast, the Prime Minister indicated today that catering to Australia's demands would pay off.
We see a global future for this country. I do think that free trade deals present a fantastic opportunity for our farmers, for businesses of all kinds, for manufacturers.
But Edwin Poots, incoming leader of the DUP, is the latest politician to voice his concerns, as official calculations say Northern Ireland could be worse off. As it puts the latest proposals to Australia, the government says any deal will include safeguards and will be phased in over 15 years. But across the country, farmers worry their livelihoods could be compromised in the blueprint for global Britain's free trade future. Darshini David, BBC News.
The time is almost 6:20. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister expresses concern in the wake of the damning report into the BBC's Panorama interview with Princess Diana.
And coming up, I'll be live in Rotterdam to find out how the stars are preparing for tomorrow's Eurovision Grand Final.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, we'll bring you the latest from the second round of the US PGA Golf, where Ian Poulter is among the early starters on day 2 in South Carolina.
The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has acknowledged the pain and suffering of victims of the contaminated blood scandal, saying the government will pay compensation if that is what is recommended. He was facing questions at a public inquiry into what's been called the worst NHS treatment disaster. Around 3,000 people died after being given blood products containing HIV and hepatitis C in the 1970s and 1980s. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
I've now faced the fact that I will never see him again on this earth. His last words were, and repeatedly, that those who did this must be brought to repent.
Sue remembers her husband Steve as she visits his grave in Devon. He was a haemophiliac who was treated by the NHS with contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. He developed hepatitis C, a debilitating illness. It meant they couldn't have children. Steve died in 2018.
This is just wonderful, and it's a superb place to come and visit the grave. If visiting the grave is about spiritual refreshment and about just finding peace and being together.
Sue, like many others who were bereaved, wanted to hear from the Health Secretary today a firm commitment to financial compensation.
I'm hoping that he's going to actually apologise, to admit that there is now enough evidence for them to stop denying that proper compensation should be paid, and not as a financial gesture, but as a gesture of contrition.
Sue travelled to London to be at the latest hearing of the public inquiry into what's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Tens of thousands were infected by blood products carrying HIV and hepatitis C.
The whole truth.
And nothing about
Matt Hancock said he understood what families had endured.
I acknowledge the pain and the suffering, not only of the errors that led to this harm on people's lives, but also a sense that redress wasn't properly considered, and that people felt their voices weren't heard.
And then to the crucial issue of compensation.
I respect the process of the inquiry, and I will respect its recommendations. And should the inquiry's recommendations point to compensation, then of course we will pay compensation.
For Sue, that was significant, but she has reservations.
It's a huge move. But of course, if they actually decide to pay compensation, if they decide to hinge it on what the inquiry decides, that gives them another 2 years, 3 years, before they have to find a penny.
The inquiry will last for at least another year, so the long wait for official recognition of their losses will continue for a while yet. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The latest coronavirus figures show there were 2,829 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, and 9 deaths were reported. The total number of deaths across the UK is now 127,710. The latest daily number of people admitted to hospital with coronavirus is 685. Turning now to the vaccinations programme, and more than 37.5 million people have now had their first COVID jab. That's more than 70% of the population. And more than 21.6 million people have had both doses, meaning more than 40% of the population is now fully vaccinated. Glasgow is to remain under level 3 COVID restrictions for at least a further week amid concern over rising number of cases. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon did decide to ease restrictions in Moray, where the situation has improved significantly, but she also urged people not to travel to Bedford, Blackburn with Darwen and Bolton to avoid contracting the Indian variant. In Bolton, there's been a huge drive to vaccinate people over the last week as coronavirus cases linked to the Indian variant continue to rise in some of the most deprived areas. Remarkably, 10,000 people have been vaccinated this week, but the concern is that there are still high numbers of cases in the areas with the lowest uptake of the vaccine, as Ed Thomas reports.
COVID cases are surging in the most deprived parts of Bolton. People who've already suffered too much.
That's me,
This
Mum.
is our nana, my nan.
Miss the daughter.
This is me.
Margaret was 78 when she died.
I've lost a person to me that was so special. And this is why I hate COVID so much, because it's took the person I loved the most. And it's proper hurt me.
She was in nursing home, and that's where she contracted COVID. And then, obviously, they had to rush her to hospital because she had breathing difficulties. She lived a week.
my anxiety has been building up and I've got more anxious about speaking to people.
And once again, the family's isolating. A suspected outbreak at the nursery. As cases spread, many fear a local lockdown.
I feel trapped, yeah. I'm absolutely trapped in this house.
Sharon has a heart condition and suffers with anxiety.
And how long have you spent like this, shielding?
I've been in here for months and months. It's like I've got a jail sentence and I've not done nothing.
On average, the 5 areas with the highest levels of deprivation in Bolton had more than double the number of weekly COVID cases compared to the least deprived areas.
Yeah, I've just had a text. It's Dear Jack, your first COVID-19 vaccination is now due.
There's a race to vaccinate as many as possible.
But I'm worried about what's in it, because people are having these jabs and then they're getting side effects of COVID.
This jab has saved thousands of lives. And people are worried if people don't take the jab here, this new variant is going to spread through.
I do agree with it. I mean, I'm not against it. I'm not saying I'm not going to have it. But I do know people are against it and I know people are for it.
Now, there's surge vaccinations and testing.
Bolton's on high alert, and it's 10 times higher than every other borough in the whole of England. If Boris put India on a red list weeks ago, then I think this problem would have happened.
There's immense pressure to increase vaccine uptake.
We're being blamed for something which is totally wrong. We didn't get the vaccination site. You know, we've got the pop-up sites. It's not about vaccine hesitancy. It's to do with deprivation, all the health inequalities, access, provision.
Now, there's a push like never before, with 10,000 vaccinations in a week.
I'm proud of being in the NHS. I'm proud of being part of this.
Because what happens here has consequences for all of us. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Bolton.
Police say rioters who smashed windows and set cars on fire in Swansea last night will face robust action. The trouble started in the Mayhill area following a vigil for a local resident who'd recently died. 7 police officers suffered minor injuries after missiles were thrown. Families spoke of being trapped in their homes during the violence. The First Minister of Wales says the scenes were completely unacceptable. The broadcaster and University Challenge presenter Jeremy Paxman has revealed he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The 71-year-old says he is receiving excellent treatment and his symptoms are currently mild. He's planning to continue broadcasting and writing, he says, for as long as they'll have me. The Eurovision Song Contest is back. After being cancelled last year because of the pandemic, it returns tomorrow night in the Netherlands. Many of the singers who were due to appear last year have returned, but COVID means it won't be quite the same. Anna Holligan is on the red carpet in Rotterdam. Anna.
Lots of anticipation and excitement here. Final rehearsals tonight ahead of tomorrow's grand final. But of course, this year's Eurovision is happening in the Netherlands, a country that still has one of the highest COVID infection rates in Europe. Everyone here is conscious of that. The artists are focusing on their performances. Limbering up after a year in lockdown for the chance to join an elite club. A victory at Eurovision will secure them not just a place in history, but the opportunity for their homeland to host next year's event.
My glorious outfit? Which glorious outfit? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I feel totally ready. So I'm just excited to get on the stage. I've been practicing in my hotel room loads, so I'm just ready to get on that stage and go for it.
How do you host the biggest singing contest on the planet during a pandemic? So testing plays a big part in this. Every 48 hours, this is where we come. Journalists, artists, crew, anyone working at Eurovision needs to make sure they haven't caught COVID. And audience too need a negative test along with their ticket to get inside.
Here are your hosts for this evening.
It's hoped the rules and protocols implemented here in Rotterdam could be used as a blueprint for the global revival of live events.
Now, especially, a lot of people are longing for normalness, the good old days, and I feel like our shows do give you a sense of that, and we do it under such strict regulations.
Which are what allow us to be here. So, who are the ones to watch in the final.
My top favorite is definitely France, a beautiful French chanson about stepping out of the shadows and into the light. My second is Italy. This is, a real rock vibe. It's all about being with people. It's edgy, it's dirty, but it's also classy and sophisticated. And my third favorite is probably Malta. This is very much about the power of saying no. It's about a woman who's in a bar, a man wants to buy her a drink, and she's like, no, thank you, I am not your honey.
COVID has made Eurovision's mission to bring people together complicated, but more coveted than ever. Anna Holligan, BBC News, Rotterdam.
Time now for a look at the weather with Helen Willits.
Sophie, it's felt a little more like autumn outside today than late spring. These are some of the gusts of wind that we've seen in more exposed areas, but even inland they've been gusting to 45, 50 miles an hour. And it's because we've got this unseasonably deep area of low pressure, which thankfully for many is moving out the way into the North Sea for tomorrow, but it allows a northerly wind in. It will take its weather fronts with it as well, because since rain started in Capel Cirig yesterday, we've had over 100 millimetres of rain. So yet more soaking conditions for this May. This is how the rainfall looks at the moment. It really is pretty wet for many this evening. Still windy as well. It does dry off a little in the north and the west overnight. The clearing skies allow a little bit of frost just in Scotland. For most of us, the wind and the rain, the main features, and still with us a lot of clouds as we start the first part of our weekend. Those strong winds still coming down the North Sea coast, having changed direction to the north. It's a chilly direction, but they blow the rain out the way. They promise more sunshine, but it's not going to be dry. There'll be a scattering of showers, heavy showers too as well, with the strong May sunshine, which could well be a little thundery into the afternoon. And temperatures, even with that sunshine, only 12 to 14, well below where they should be, and that's because once again the winds are coming down from the Arctic. That stops tomorrow night temporarily. We've got a window of fine weather, but again more widely chilly with a touch of ground frost. But you may have noticed the next rain band coming in. Yeah, so perhaps a dry start on Sunday despite rather chilly start, but the rain comes in, a few hours for Northern Ireland, showers follow, and then it pushes its way across mainland UK during the afternoon. 12 to 13, again, no great shakes considering it's late May. But let's hold our breaths because it may well start a little bit showery next week. But as we approach the middle of the week towards the weekend, there's just the hint that this high pressure will build and cut off all those showers. And we may at last have a spell of drier weather, Sophie.
Let's hope so, Helen. Thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.